From the 2012 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books, I'm Barbara Deeb, and we are taking you outside the book. Today, we begin things with David Bell. That's Dr. David Bell at Western Kentucky University, who's written a very popular book. It's growing in popularity. It's called Cemetery Girl. We're going to talk more about that. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, I said Dr. David Bell because you are a professor of English, so it stands to reason that you know words and you know literature, and so guess what? You wrote a book. Is that something that you'd always aspired to?
Yes, it is. I wouldn't say it stands to reason that I know a lot about literature and books just because I have that. But yeah, ever since I was a kid, I loved to read. I grew up in a house where everybody read, everybody in the family read, so I grew up reading, and it was just a natural leap to say, I want to write my own book someday. So that's how it started.
So that's how it started, but I was saying you have a grasp of the language, you have a grasp of literature, and so it might make it a little easier to put words to paper. Although we don't put them to paper anymore, do we?
No,
do you have
we
a
don't.
process by which you write?
I try to just write a little bit every day. I try to have a consistent, do a little bit. With a novel, I tell my students if you wrote a page a day, you would have a novel in a year. So I think slow and steady wins the race sometimes. So I just try to do the amount that I can do during the day, in between having a day job as an English professor. So that can be difficult sometime, but then I have summers off, so I can get a lot more work done then.
Now, Cemetery Girl, you referenced the fact that you and your wife will often walk through actually an area cemetery. So did that serve as the inspiration, or how did this book come to you?
The setting really did come early on because I moved to Bowling Green in the fall of 2008, and I live right by Kyriakis Park and Fairview Cemetery, and so I saw that setting. It's a beautiful cemetery and a beautiful park, and I said, how strange that this park and the cemetery are side by side. What a contrast. And so I had to put that setting right into the book, and so the story I had in mind went right into that setting.
Do you believe and subscribe to write what you know?
I think you have to write what you know, but I think at the same time, I tell my students you have to write what you don't know. I think writing is an act of discovery, so I think sometimes as you're writing, you learn things, or books take unexpected turns, or characters do surprising things, so you can't be really rigid and think I'm only going to write about what I know, because that could get boring. Hopefully there's that surprise that comes along. If the writer is surprised, then I think the reader will be surprised. So I think that's a good thing when you veer off into what you don't know.
The characters, shaping and forming, and you get to create. And so how did that process work for you? Did they speak to you, through you? How'd that go?
Well, I think it happens that I have to hear their voice in my head. I hear the way these people sound, and that gives me a sense of who they are. And I think characters drive stories. I think you have to have characters who want to do things and want things, and I think you have to have characters who are complicated people, who have flaws and who have positive aspects.
You mean so characters drive it more than the plot, or is it the characters that drive the plot that
I think
make
it's
the
characters
story?
that drive the plot. Characters want something and they do things, and then you have a plot. You can't superimpose the plot onto characters because, you think about the way we live our lives. Our lives take certain directions because of who we are and the choices we make, and I think fictional characters are the same way. They do things and they get into trouble because of the choices they make.
So this is hugely important in your book, the characters, and shaping them and making them come to life. And so you talk about getting in their space, getting into who they are. Share that process with us a little bit.
Well, I think that writing a book for a long time, writing a novel can take a year or 2 years. It's almost as though you live with these people. It's like they move into your head. And so as I walk through my life, I'm hearing their voices in my head, and I'm thinking about them, and I'm thinking, well, what if they did this, or what if they did that, or what if they had this conversation? So it really is like you get this new family that moves into your brain for a while, and you spend a lot of time with them, and then when the book is over, they move out and a new family moves in, and you start living with those people. So you hear a lot of voices in your head, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, but I also hear, and I've spoken and interviewed many authors along the way who say they were given that character, that character began to speak through them. Any of that with this book?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying about characters being surprising sometimes. I mean, there's a character in here, the protagonist's brother is a character who I think the reader won't really know how to take him for a lot of the book, but he does surprising things, surprisingly good things, surprisingly questionable things, and sometimes that just happens. You don't know that that character is going to play a certain role in the story, but they reveal themselves to be more interesting even than you thought they might be. They have, just like people in life have these layers that we didn't know they had, fictional characters reveal these layers sometimes, and you say, wow, I didn't know he was going to do that. I didn't know he was that kind of person.
In the eyes of the beholder, in the eyes of the reader, then, is how this transformation takes place, this revealing takes place?
Yeah, hopefully it happens the same way for the reader, that they're as surprised as I am and that they see these layers to the character. And of course it has to make sense on some level. It can't be out of the blue. But hopefully then that leads to the surprises for the reader.
And we should all live our lives in a state of surprise, shouldn't we?
Well, within certain limits, yes. There are certain aspects of life where you don't want surprises, but sure, the occasional surprise is a good thing.
Not a
I
bad
agree.
thing. Let's tell us, without giving out too much about the book, Cemetery Girl, tell us a little bit about the plot.
It's a story of Tom and Abby Stewart, and they're a married couple, and they have a perfect life until the day their 12-year-old daughter disappears. And when the book opens, she's been gone for 4 years, and they're facing the dilemma of, is it time to move on and accept that she's never going to come back, or do we continue to hold out hope that she's going to come back? And that's really, there's a split between the two of them about how they approach that, and that's the main conflict at the opening of the book. And not to give too much away, but pretty early on in the book, Caitlin does come back, and they have to figure out now, what do you do with this 16-year-old child who walked out the door when she was 12, and how do you suddenly respond to that? It's like having a stranger back in your house, but she is your child. So lots of complications grow out of that.
And good conflict, good.
Hopefully lots of good conflict, lots of good family conflict. It's really about a family dealing with an extraordinary circumstance, and this family trying to stay together and make sense of what it means to be a family.
And what next for David Bell?
I have another book coming out in October 2nd. It's called The Hiding Place. Same kind of story, a family dealing with an extraordinary circumstance, trying to make sense of a tragedy that happened in the past, and trying to figure out how their new family bonds will exist in the wake of that.
Cathartic in a way?
I hope so. I hope so at the end, you know, the family learns something and they're together in a way that maybe they hadn't anticipated before.
And takes the reader with them along the way.
Yes, hopefully.
On the journey. The book is called Cemetery Girl. We've been talking with author Dr. David Bell, coming to you from the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books as part of the 2012 Book Festival on Outside the Book. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.